Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Lounge Podcast. My name is DS Nate, and today I'm here with Hex, Kite, and Sheldon Lester. Hey guys, how's it going?
Uh,
Yeah. So today, we're gonna do a topic mainly just, I guess, around forms of different stories you can tell in itself, in terms of long form storytelling and short form storytelling. Just kind of like run over like the differences, advantages, disadvantages, and the like. I believe this was Echo's topic. So I would have, if she was here, I'll have her to like probably just open up how, her thoughts on it and kind of open up the whole thing. But since you're not here, I could give a gander, basically talk about like what my like initial thoughts on it is, and then just open up to you guys. So I think like long form storytelling and short form storytelling, just basically just a length of time you have to tell a story. You can even see, I guess, in you can even compare it to like, I guess, TV shows of like movie to a TV series. That's a movie is a bit of more of a short form. A TV series is a little more of a long form, and it's just basically just the amount of time you have to tell a story, and then through that, what kind of advantage, disadvantage you have from that. I imagine most of it come down to taste, but and also I guess there's two ways to look at this when I'm thinking about it. There's the watching it, or like, consuming the media, like either reading the book or watching the show or watching the movie, and then there's actually writing it. I would imagine when Aiko was talking about this, she was more talking about the writing side, but we can talk about both. I guess for like short and long form storytelling for like TV shows and movies, I'm using TV shows and movies. I think it's a good example in that on that side of things. It's just it's the length of time you have to tell a story, and because of that, like what kind of stories you tend to find there, like or kind of like what kind of, I say beats, like there's different, different like the 3-act structure and stuff, and I do find when people talk about, I guess, movies compared to TV shows, because TV shows, they have more time. You have more time to do that, to develop the characters, but also you have more time to have like to build up stakes and have like things don't necessarily. You can have an episode that ends, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a super positive ending, because obviously it has more because there's a continuation there. Where in the movie, unless you planned out sequel well in advance or something, you tend to have your conclusion and everything kind of wrapped up in there. And I think obviously the taste and what you like in like what you prefer, it comes down to your own personal taste. Because me personally, I think I lean more towards TV shows. I just find you have more time with the characters, you can get more invested, and there's more. It can be less predictable. It can be less predictable because there's just more time. There's more time to mess around with more ideas. Where in a movie, it can be shorter, and therefore it could be you can kind of tell where it's going, but because of that as well, I think it gives them the room to be like more creative with it, if that makes sense. Because I'm trying to figure like the initial differences. Like I guess an example, I know I'm not really best with examples, but I think I was watching like a movie. What was it called? It was something kitchen the other day, because I haven't watched these movies, but like
might be able to chime in with the examples of what you're talking about. So,
okay,
yeah. So in terms of like what you were saying is basically it's the difference between like long term and short term for what we're talking about, like TV versus movie. So movie, genuinely, unless there's like a sequel like planned out, or there's one like established, then a movie needs to basically, if it's like just one start to finish and that's it, needs to tell that entire story in its runtime. That can be tricky if simply because of theatrical movie constraints, where you have to where like and like this is a process that is done that is completely normal in cinema. It's cutting out bits. That's why you have like director's cuts where they attempt to add those bits back. They often like put in like a lot more context. But ultimately, in terms of that would be essentially it needs to sort of tell its entire plot. So I think an example I'm going to give is actually for like the movie side for short-term storytelling is actually like a personal favorite of mine. It's a movie called Coraline. So this is to give you a brief summary. It's a stop motion animation starring with the titular character Coraline, voiced by Dakota Fanning. The plot essentially is she moves to like a house with her parents, which she doesn't quite get along with, and like lives like a very dull and boring life. But then while she's exploring her house, she finds like a door and goes to this sort of best way to call it, like I think they even call it that, the other world, which is sort of a parallel of that house where everything is like bright, bubbly, and it's exciting, which ultimately ends up being the point for that other world. And the movie can sort of be broken down into two sections. It's why I love the movie so much. So the first one, it's very much like a sort of kids movie where you sort of have like, you know, the kid going through like the sort of dull, mundane everyday life. And then she goes to that exciting mystical place. And then you get to the other half of the film, where the hot thing becomes much, much darker. I won't spoil it. Like, for people who haven't watched it, I won't spoil it. But it's a film I'd highly recommend. And I'd say that's a good form of storytelling because it tells essentially two halves of the same story within the span of, I think the movie's about 2 hours. And then on like a TV side, now admittedly, like TV is an Achilles heel of mine, but now this is I think easy example to bring up for like long-term storytelling, and we've brought this up a lot of times, and I certainly have brought it up, is Cobra Kai. And I will continually bring it up because that's probably the best example I have. Like, I could also like point to Avatar, but I mean, Cobra Kai's come first to mine, and that is more or less like the continuation of the old Karate Kid movies, which were more or less like you can consider to be like short-term storytelling, because I think when those were filmed, even if you were just watching them, they do feel like, you know, they're just like their own thing. What Cobra Kai does is sort of contextualize what happened in the original Karate Kid movies and like span like sort of a narrative from that. Like obviously years on, where Danny LaRusso and Johnny Lawrence are now grown adults, and they all have their own kids, and it's sort of where the advantages of it being a TV show comes in because they're able, because each season's 10 episodes long, and each episode is
about an hour or so, isn't it?
Yeah, it can range from no, I think like it's mostly like 30-40 minutes. The final episode of the final episodes though are an hour. But you're able to sort of
they have more breathing room to actually really flesh out the characters. The amount of characters they have as well, it would be hard to do in a movie.
Yeah, and this is it's sort of the advantage that a TV show, long-term narrative has over a short term, which is like a movie. Simply because simply because you have more runtime, and that's can more or less like be just like the constraints of like cinema to TV.
I kind of want to jump in on that a bit because I
Yeah,
think
go ahead.
because I think we're mostly bringing up a lot of length here as well as time. I think this definition starts to get a bit tricky, or if not a little bit more nuanced, when we start to account for shows these days or particular projects lasting a movie length instead. Because in the past, we used to have shows that only lasted about like 30 minutes at a time. But once it got to like the golden age of television, we started to get shows, pardon me, that started to go into the double length side of things. So they had more time to establish more particular story routes or story beats. The example that I want to bring up today is The Wire. How many of us have watched The Wire in this room?
I have not.
I'm thinking about watching it, but I haven't checked it out yet.
I highly recommend that you do so because The Wire is, well, calling it cinema actually doesn't begin to describe the scope of it. So let me get into my example. What makes The Wire a very good example that I want to bring up is that it is a master of both short-term and long-term storytelling. Specific ideas that are brought up within some episodes actually echo well into the series up until the final arc. For example, the character arc of Omar, he's something of a legend within this community, right? What we see is a guy walking around with a sawed-off shotgun. We hear the rumors, we hear all these stories from everyone until he starts showing up. We start to get an idea that a lot of these legends may be blown out of proportion, but we start to get to know the character behind those legends. So to kind of give a bit of a mild spoiler, let's just say when Omar meets his ultimate fate, those stories are still being told. But we, as the reader, as the viewer, have the context of both the legends that are spoken by the characters and how he behaves on screen. So that even when he is long gone, the long-term narrative of the characters within this community are somewhat influenced by his actions due to how he carried himself. So we get both short-term satisfaction with his actions, but we also get the long-term consequences of what his presence really means. And this can be seen throughout the entire series. So this is kind of what I mentioned earlier. Calling The Wire cinema, I feel, doesn't begin to describe the scope. And the reason for that is it wasn't necessarily written by itself as a television series, but it was also supervised and co-written by actual novelists and people who are very knee-deep into the crime area. So basically, what I think this topic really needs to what we really need to zoom into on this topic is what exactly can we point to as really good examples of short-term satisfaction and long-term consequences within the within the sphere. Because if you ask me, I think when it comes to this topic of short-term and long-term, I think both of these work more hand in hand than we realize.
Oh yeah.
We have like short-term for, keeping people's attention and long-term for actually rewarding you for paying attention. Because I would really love to talk about what ultimately happens to Omar in the grand scheme of The Wire, but the most I can tell you without really spoiling anything is just when you thought the legends about Omar could not get any more exaggerated from when the series begins, when the series ends, it becomes completely untenable to the point where the characters can't even tell what is real or what is fake at that point. Even we as the audience, even though we know the truth, the characters within the show, they're within their own reality. So there's more of a disconnect. And the best part is this happens over a span of time that you get to view personally.
Yeah. No, but yeah, I totally agree with you. I mean, there's the mix of there's long-term storytelling and short-term, and they do go hand in hand. Because I mean, one the art example is so easy to me. I don't want to say it, but I can give other examples as well. But one easy example is just One Piece. Like each arc is its own okay. Inverted comments, short story. I mean, some of them are actually legit really short. But it's overall telling an epic flipping tale. So like that is like. Yeah, a real perfect example of like just using that, and also just the act of writing a scene or a story or a book you have your scenes, then you have your chapters, then you have your book, and then just different. If there was a main difference in that sort of structure thing with it depends on how short. Like obviously, a short story could just be a small book to just like like for example 5,000 words, 5,000 words we was doing, like which we're doing recently here as well. So and the main difference between them is just, okay, I have this X amount of time to write this story, and in again the example like using 5,000 words, you could probably get like that's like a chapter. So you'll basically have to write so in the chapter you have, but even in the chapter you have a bunch of scenes. It's not really, well, you can have one scene, you can do that, but you can have a bunch of scenes, and those bunch of scenes make it a chapter, and then from there you have chapters, and then a book, so to speak. So
I think
to add to your mention about One Piece as well. The thing about One Piece is that while there is like an overall narrative, and there's always the question of like, how do you keep yourself engaged with writing a long form story, right? I think there's a lot of issues. Like we talk a lot about the prose, but something I think one definite con with writing a long form story is that it's very hard to stay committed to it when you lose interest, like over time.
Yeah.
Sometimes
Like that has absolutely happened to me on like several things.
Yeah.
It's even though I haven't written a long form story yet, the ideas. I mean, I did initially think about it to write a long form, and then this was back when I was still writing that the Coda story, but yeah, like as I was writing, I was realizing I want to do this and that and this, but I can't just transition directly into it. It's like too much. There's too much build up required to make it pay off.
Yeah, I'd say as someone who does has been very publicly in my commitment to writing long form storytelling, I can say it is not easy, especially if you're sort of plotting out, like if you're like, because essentially I'm basically writing one book, but then with the intention that there's going to be another book and another one and another one and another one. So it's I can personally say like so this is just like my personal experience, but I have had a lot of fun in sort of just forming the sort of long-standing narrative and just like saying, okay, it's going to be here, and I'm along with a really ambitious goal to connect things together.
But can I add something to that? Or...
Yeah, go ahead.
I think there's a good question here. I think you're probably sneaking up to it anyways, but yeah, go.
Yeah.
No. Well, I did want to ask a final thing, right? Where it's the question of, you think about the long form narrative, and there's obviously a lot of satisfaction when it comes to pulling off a long form narrative that you've been building over time. But the question is always, how do you keep yourself engaged in writing a long form story?
That is actually a very good question.
Yeah, I knew this question. I knew this question was coming.
I have an answer, or I have my personal perspective on that, and this is based on again like Oda, how he does his stories. And after this, you guys can say what you guys think. Sorry, I'm like interrupting and stuff.
No,
go ahead. Want to give this.
Good.
But the thing that I've noticed with Oda is that he has made One Piece. He has made the world of One Piece something that is very vast with a lot of potential. And I think that the potential always, and there's always a wild card in his stories, which is mainly the devil fruits, I feel. Because the devil fruits basically allow for so much creativity in what he wants to do in his arcs. So when he wanted to write like a kind of like a sort of zombie horror kind of story arc, he made what was it called?
Thriller Bark.
And he used the shadow fruit from what was that guy's name again?
Gecko Moria.
Exactly. He used the shadow fruit from Gecko Moria to create this place that is basically like zombies and horror monsters and all that. And then he made he wanted to make like a Disney island, right? He wanted to make an arc about like Disney because he loves Disney and he loves, I don't know, he wanted to make sort of that type of arc, and he used Big Mom's fruit to create, the whole cake island. I think if you have some sort of if you have a wild card that allows for so much flexibility in your story, you could kind of add multiple genres of what you want to write for each arc as you're writing the story, kind of thing, which I've tried to incorporate into mine as well. I tried to see what can I do, what can I add as a wild card factor that can make it where I can have these cool, unique locations.
And also keep in mind, it doesn't have to be. I mean, keep in mind.
I'm gonna sort of jump in on that, saying it's not while I will absolutely agree with saying with the potential of devil fruits, I will counter that by saying that it's not that alone which allows it creativity, because basically when sort of a lot of that has to do with establishing some sort of world building if you're going to do a long form storytelling, and just think, okay, I want to do a lot of different things, but how can I do it in a way that just doesn't feel like I'm just doing random shit? So and my case, I think I've said this a lot of times, but my writing is basically based on whatever I thought was cool at the time. And I've sort of cemented them and in generally in my head, because it's only recently I've started to jot down notes. But I've sort of just daydreamed how that would look, how that would work out, and it has led to me having a lot of fun. So especially with one of in my first edition, where I've basically taken a lot of inspiration from Halo in creating a sort of hollow world. And then just have a lot of sci-fi stuff that, and then trying to conform it to, so it doesn't feel like it's completely random.
I kind of think there's another way of doing this. The way how I retain my retention throughout long-term work is character. At the heart of everything I write, it really comes down to what characters I have running around. Every time a character is made, what I normally do is I define what their wants are, I define what their needs are, and the lies that they believe. What I then do from that point on is there's this intricate web of relationships, what one character does will inevitably affect the other. So at that point, it really is just a drama of seeing what are these characters going to do here, and how is this one person's action going to end up affecting the other one? Because even the smallest person who only has one line of dialogue or only shows up in the scene every now and again, there's consequences for everyone. So even in the grand scheme of all the epic world building, grand scale, sometimes when you slow the scale down and just bring it over to the boots on the ground, you're gonna find that what you have is very compelling, and that fundamentally is what keeps me going. And at the same time, that's what keeps people going in these stories too. Because it's cool to talk about the cool stuff and all what a writer can do to keep their attention going, but sometimes it's as basic as, okay, what's going on here? What's this character doing? How does this action affect the other? I mean, as terrible as it sounds, there's a reason why awful romance stories are usually at the top of the charts, because people are into that kind of trash drama. It's what keeps them coming back. What you need is a point of interest or a point of contact that keeps people coming back. And sometimes witnessing a train wreck is what keeps them coming. The best examples I can give for this are the Vengeance trilogy. So I'm talking about movies like Old Boy, and I'm talking about Sympathy for Mr. Vengeance. I'm talking about that one. To kind of give a brief summary of how that one starts out, basically, there's this guy. He's deaf, and he is also mute. But the thing is, his sister is dying, and she needs a replacement kidney. Now, he volunteers himself, but the thing is, he gets swindled. So he loses his kidney, and he cannot help his sister. So what does he choose to do instead? Kidnaps this governor's daughter in order to ransom her. Now I bet you, here's what you guys are thinking. You guys are thinking, just how bad is this going to get? Well, I'm happy to tell you, it gets very bad very quickly.
Oh God.
Because here's what happens
I think I
next.
know about this.
The thing is, he may have kidnapped the guy's daughter, but he's very nice to her. Like, he does everything he can to keep her happy and fed. And he's also working alongside his girlfriend, who's in on the plan as well. In fact, I believe she's the one who encouraged him to go about kidnapping the guy's daughter anyway. So one day he goes down to the river with this girl, and tragically she ends up drowning. Yeah. So he can't even get the rent. He can't even get the ransom money, and he can't even return the daughter because now she's dead. To make things worse, now his sister has died due to kidney failure. So now here's the problem. He now has the government coming after his ass now because that daughter is dead. And eventually, the governor does catch up with him and he does get him killed. But the governor is not satisfied. He then goes after the guy's girlfriend. And the guy's girlfriend warns him that if he does this, he's going to be hunted down by the mafia. The governor does not believe this. What happens to the governor in the end? The governor is assassinated by the same gang that she warned him about. That is a train wreck that you knew was coming from the start, but you are so engrossed that you cannot take your eyes off it. You were just waiting for everything to come to a head. If you ask me, that is not only a case of what I described, but it is also a blanket case of what happens when an audience gets so morbidly curious that they just want to see just how bad it can get. And the end result, if you ask me, is morbidly satisfying. It's kind of like Parasite. It's the same reason you like Parasite. You know that something bad is going to happen. It's just a matter of when and how frequently they do. And technically speaking, Parasite kind of follows the same structure that I mentioned. I mean, people don't get killed until like near the last push of the movie, but you are actively waiting to see what these characters are going to do to make their lives better. You are actively wanting to see just how awful the rich family is. And then when it all comes to a head in this blistering train wreck of what the fuck, it is incredible. That's what keeps you going, as morbid as it sounds.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. Like, I think overall, I think all these things come together to make the moment to moment stuff actually interesting. And yeah, definitely characters for me it's definitely up there. But I think regards to how I because I do love, like, the story I'm doing is basically really long form storytelling as well, and kind of like I was saying, where I definitely taken. I know when I started my story, I had characters I was interested in, but like it's also the world they're in, because the world also it dictates the situations they'll be in and how many situations they're going to be in. Like, for example, I think that's the reason why I find like a big vast world so interesting, because there's so much more situations you can put your characters in with the same characters, and you can keep going, and obviously within reason. Obviously, you don't want to drag out until it's milk dry and everything. But like it's I think the best way to put it is like the characters are the center of the whole story. Like, they are, for me, this obviously some people they probably say differently, but for me, they are like the most important part. Like, you follow and see what happens to them, their situation and everything. But like the world is like giving the character different flavors of things to interact with to keep like, it keeps things interesting. It keeps you interested as well, because it's like, okay, you went through this whole situation. Like, I guess, for example, I know when I started my story, I was looking at I saw Kingdom Hearts and Star Wars. I thought, if I can make a world vast as that, or something where it's potentially I don't feel like I'm limited to where I can be, and I can then start writing things within reason in that world, that'd be awesome. So from there, it just leaves me free to kind of like, okay, well, I can do this situation, and this can lead to this and this and this, and I don't feel that's inhibited by like, oh, it has to be kind of done in this sort of same thing. So I think in terms of long storytelling, having a world that can cater to that does help a lot. But obviously, the characters are the ones that in that story.
I would generally argue that characters are definitely what really drives these sort of things. Like, because essentially, if you sort of have like, okay, so one example I have where ultimately that isn't the case is off the top of my head is Scarlet Nexus, which was a game by Bandai Namco. and it has like a very interesting world. What lets down with it is probably one of the most boring and inane casts I've ever seen in a JRPG. And like, because this is like it's so basically, to give you a brief premise, it's a world where sort of brain power and psychic abilities are sort of like now like everyday occurrence, to the point where like people with this sort of that most people can see sort of like holograms like on buildings, and it's powered by sort of like psychic energy. But then you also have like this encroachment of monsters. I think that, if I remember, they're typically called brain eaters, and you could probably guess what they are.
Mhm.
And you have the I forgot the name of this organization. I think anyone who like listening to this and knows remembers Scarlet Nexus, please like tell me what this organization is. But it's basically a group, this sort of like army that's basically of like psychic users to fight the brain eaters and keep like humanity safe, because it's a sort of post-apocalyptic world, and a very interesting one because you see sort of the world sort of breaking down with like things like floating in the air, like literal holes in the world. What really makes it forgettable is just the cast of characters. They are not great. Like, I'd say, like, ultimately I would say the plot of it really is like a B grade anime that you just stream and forget afterwards.
That you probably watched when you were like wicked young, thinking it was like
yes, exactly.
And then when you hit like 25 years old, you're like, man,
this is stupid.
This is lame AF, bro.
Yeah, that sums up Scarlet Nexus really well, because I honestly cannot tell you what the plot is, because it is such a mess. Because like it is such a mess. Like, things just happen.
But was the gameplay fun?
Oh god, the gameplay was really good. Like, once you it gets going, like and you've sort of unlocked a few skills, like the actual gameplay is good. It's just that these characters are so goddamn boring.
I want to add Oh, go on, James. I'll add my point after.
Sorry, this is going to be a mini rant, but the only one I remember is the one I hate the most, and it's a character called Shiden.
That's a
simply
good thing,
because he's the kind of guy he's the abrasive guy who like always like who just generally does not like, who basically just doesn't like you. And the problem like with Scarlet Nexus's characters is just that they never break from that what they're established to be.
From their character, their core.
Yeah, exactly. So I did not like Shiden to begin with. By the end of the game, I still did not like Shiden.
Yeah, so they even though it sounded like they had an interesting world, interesting setting.
Yeah.
They didn't do enough to. Yeah, they didn't do enough. To,
rant over. But I think that's an example of like, if you drop the ball, it can basically make the whole thing forgettable.
Yeah, so it seemed like although they had like an interesting world, interesting setting, they didn't do enough of the characters to actually make them feel like they're taking like anything out from that world.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, they were just their core characteristics, and they say their core characteristics, and there was nothing new. There was nothing new they picked up from like the situation they were in necessarily.
Yeah, I mean, even
yeah,
because even like a Tales, some of the Tales get like some of the I'm gonna say Tales of Arise, which has arguably a story that really lets itself down, does have like a really good cast of characters. I love that group.
I actually
just let down by this.
I want to give you like the polar opposite example of Scarlet Nexus real quick. So
go ahead, please.
Yeah, since we're veering into game territory, I think I can this one up justifiably. So I am going to bring up the infamous Corpse Party. I'm talking about the first game and Book of Shadows in particular. So Corpse Party has a very unique situation in the sense that here you have an ensemble cast, and you have several other side characters, people who are only named but only show up in like spin-offs. you have a vast array of characters set in a school that is going out of its way or is literally meant to kill as many people as possible. Because of that, you have a situation where these characters and their situations and their lives are portrayed as rawly as possible. This means that your perception of each character is going to vary depending on who you're playing as at the time, and there's only specific details about said character that only some people are aware of at the time. However, when the opposite happens, this is where things start to get really interesting. The thing is, there are some situations where characters will interact with another one not knowing just how dangerous this person is. Or you will have a situation where these characters are thrust into this world, but they do not know the first thing about how it works. But we as the audience do. Corpse Party has this unique thing where the characters can only know so much at a time, but the audience can also know more than they do. So there's this balancing act of knowledge where where we know this, the characters don't, and because of that imbalance at the time, we as the audience, we are both aware of just how nasty this world is and just how nasty some characters can be, but the disconnect that it creates really gets you enthralled in the moment. What you have is a plot that is engaging us on all fronts. From our sensory details, from what we know, what we don't know, our ignorance, our knowledge, and sometimes it tries to play your knowledge against you. Sometimes what you know in the moment is ultimately what gets you killed within the story. And the same thing applies to these characters as well. For example, if you know a certain character is very, very selfish, you have the option to let them do what they want and just basically just bow out because you know what they're doing is suicidal. However, here's the problem. There's another aspect of the character that you should have picked up on while you were playing through the story. This character has a jealous streak. A nasty jealous streak every time a certain character is brought up. So what do you think happens knowing you abandoned that character when you should have gone with them? I'll tell you what happens. Everything goes wrong. This is a situation where what you should know should have come into play, but you couldn't see the long-term consequences of the world acting against you and fundamentally a trait of the character that was always present. So this is one of my favorite examples that I love to bring up whenever I'm talking about what people know, what you don't know, and fundamentally what it means to be engaged on both a storytelling level and a world-building level. Because Corpse Party is very insistent on letting you know how its rules work very quickly. And even when it seems like those rules are in abject contradiction, it just reminds you of one unfortunate aspect. You don't know anything. You don't know anything until it's too late. And that, if you ask me, is really, really good and intense writing. It works. It's like Scarlet Nexus has the opposite issue where it does have an interesting world, but the characters can't even come close to carrying it. Despite how human and fragile a lot of characters are within Corpse Party, some more than others, you end up believing in what little faith they have in the fact that they can escape. But at the end of the day, a lot of this stuff is completely out of their hands. You want to see them make it, but you know that the cards are stacked, that the deck has always been rigged from the beginning.
Mm. Yeah, no, I definitely see what you mean. Like, it's a combination of a lot of choices you made beforehand that have far-reaching consequences later on. So there's like there's the short form and long form storytelling kind of come into that there.
Exactly. Like I'm not even kidding. Like from way at the beginning of the game up until the very end, there's still consequences that were foreshadowed so early in that they all just come full swing. And the best part is they never stop. Corpse Party definitely knows how to wield, hey, if you're curious about this, you can check this out. But hey, that thing that you did earlier, that one thing that you said to that one character, it turns out it has a lot more meaning than you thought. You remember that time where you couldn't remember anything when your character's consciousness just blacked out and you showed up in this room? Well, it turns out your character did something pretty messed up. And you're not even going to know unless you survive that long. There's so many details hidden within actions due to the fact that all of our characters are unreliable narrators in one shape or form. And because of that, you can't really trust what they think either or what they say. Because fundamentally speaking, the school preys on that. It preys on what it tells you and what it doesn't tell you. The last bit of the last example I will give you is the truth of what was really happening. In Corpse Party, you were told that it was a teacher that committed the murders, and for the longest time, it is very easy to buy into that. But what makes the ultimate plot twist so cruel is that it is so inexplicable and so out of nowhere to the point where it's way too horrific for you to even for you to even comprehend just how completely unlikely this is. But then what Corpse Party ends up doing is it explains how this actually works to a point, and then it just makes the ultimate plot twist just all the more twisted. And what makes this even better, the game already told you who did this from the beginning. There was already a name drop very early in at the beginning, but you had no concept of figuring that out until you survived that long into the story. And when you do find the name as it's written later on in the story, all of a sudden that character's motivations and behavior, you can see where this behavior came from. It's a nice case of misdirection and just plain manipulation. But of course, I do need to mention that there is one aspect for long-term storytelling that I think we might have avoided up till now. It's the subject of misdirection. Like I mentioned, Corpse Party has a lot of that, but the problem with misdirection is when it feels like it's done for misdirection's sake. It's like you can only string
just a twist for the sake of a twist.
Exactly. Like you can only string someone around long enough until they get their questions answered. We have to think about how those answers are delivered, because answering questions via misdirection is something that you can do, but it's just a question of what ends up happening when we come to the ultimate conclusion. Because if you ask me, what Corpse Party succeeds at is the misdirection has a point. It always has a point. And even when you think you've gotten everything, it just turns out that you only have a small piece of the puzzle. And even when you have all of the pieces together, there's still a dire consequence waiting for you at the end of every single decision that every character ends up making, such as that one I just told you about earlier. You can choose to abandon the character and choose to live a life outside of the school and survive, but you doing that is what ultimately dooms everyone. And even if you choose to go back, there's still no guarantee that you're getting out of there either. There's still mistakes that you can make, and you know where all these mistakes come from? Not just the world and school trying to ruin you. It's just the fact that these are children. These are teenagers, so they're gonna make stupid decisions.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can I ask one thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do you feel about, like, would you, I mean, how do you say this? Yeah, everyone has read Berserk, right?
Oh yeah, I've read.
I haven't read it
Have you
fully.
have you
but
ever- Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Do you know about anything regarding the Golden Age?
I've
watched the movie,
so yeah.
I've not read the actual manga of it.
Okay, well, at least you know the betrayal, right, by Griffith.
Yeah.
So the question is rather, like, how much of it was foreshadowed? Like, how could, if
I think that's actually.
Do you feel like by the time that Griffith had made this betrayal, like, you feel like, yeah, this is something this character would do, like, you knew about him?
I thought it
The thing
actually.
is, I would actually say yes because of like I think it's because like I said, I haven't read the manga of it. I've watched the movie, and it's the ending of the first movie where it has the famous scene with sort of Griffith talking about his dream with Princess Elizabeth, and like how he just can't fathom a man who just simply serves for someone else's dream, unbeknownst to him that was
Guts
in earshot of Guts, who
That's fundamentally what he did to Guts. And
yeah,
the irony is that he never really realized that until, well, guess what? Guts comes back. He has Casca. He can do everything that Griffith can't do right now. So when you realize that Griffith has always been ambitious from the start, because if you remember this again, the Band of the Hawk, they swore their loyalty and allegiance and even their lives to Griffith. This is why the statement "Griffith did nothing wrong" keeps popping up, because the Band of the Hawk willingly gave their lives to Griffith. And when you give your life to someone who is that ambitious, does it really surprise anyone that he ultimately made the choice he did once the God Hand decided to reveal themselves to him? Ask me, no.
Yeah, and also like prior to that, like a lot of their comrades were killed in battle. They would have been killed following this man's dream and ambition.
Mm.
And as cruel as it sounds, what difference does it make if Griffith is the one who kills them when they fundamentally store their lives?
And it adds a lot of weight to because Rickett, one of the 3 survivors of the Band of the Hawk, who survived because he was away when that happened, so he never knew like what had happened within the vortex that he saw on the outside. And well, Casca literally could not. Casca's mind had completely broken. Guts, meanwhile, just did not say anything about what happened. It was only when he reunited with Griffith that he thought it'd be like a great reunion. But when he saw how angry Guts got, and how the first thing he did was charged at him, and then the emergence of Zod, where Guts like finally told him what had happened, and it took Rickett a while to sort of process this, because his initial thought was just, "Please take me with you." To which Guts simply said, "You can't hate Griffith."
And that's what makes this very interesting, the Golden Age, because like even if you never go beyond the Golden Age in Berserk, it is very much a complete story in and of itself. Because the foreshadowing of Griffith has always been a long term. It's always been a long game from the beginning. Like we see this very ambitious, plucky lad who wants to find his place, and he's all smiles. He is able to convince people to join him via his rhetoric and his strength. That's how he got Guts there. But what is interesting is that there were always the seeds planted for something darker in him. We know that when Griffith feels as though he's losing control, this is when he starts to do desperate acts. Whether it is actually giving up his body to a twisted individual, or just forcing himself on a princess just to get into her good graces when he feels slighted. All of these aspects to Griffith's personality were there from the beginning. It just took the story just took its time showing it.
Yeah, and also like he was also not because there was a moment where he like survived an assassination and just sort of publicly brushed it off. But then in the shadows, he asked Guts, "I know who did it."
Exactly. Yeah. Like we know for sure that there was always this darker aspect to Griffith, and then in the eclipse, that is where it all comes to a head. It is masterful writing in more ways than one. Like if you want a clear example as to what it means to marry these two forms of storytelling, just look at what happens at the end of the Golden Arc, and then go back to the very beginning and look at the man that you felt something for, and you see the monster he becomes at the final portion.
I think this always talk about like the storytelling, long and short and everything, and I'm just thinking about some of the shows. I've noticed. I think one thing, especially like when you look at the long ones, is this thing of change of the world and the character, like the world and the characters, and the reflection of the world and characters. Like in One Piece, it's more of a change of distance. Like this is just one thing. A change of distance, going different places. There's different themes in them places, so that there's different place to go to.
Yeah, different like theme, event. It's like an adventure. Like
So it has different different themes, and that contextualizes like different aspects of the story Oda wants to cover. And then in Berserk, is like a different age. Like almost every big key moment, from what I can tell in Berserk, the world changes.
And not just the world, but also the characters.
Yeah, both. That's what I mean, exactly. Both
and I think like one really good, a good example of this change is look no further than Guts himself, because you see him go from sort of this abused orphan boy, like first introduced as I think like in the rhetoric of Fist of the North Star, where the concept it was basically
just this badass swordsman.
Introduce badass, cool concept. And basically skin deep, and that was like that was something Eye Patch Wolf put in his like tribute video to Miura.
Mm-hmm.
Before and this was before Miura began to work on the Golden Age arc, where he then began to go through the life of Guts, where he was, and it's an amazing sort of journey when you sort of go from like him being like this tortured lad to this brutal wayward mercenary to this stoic leader of the Band of the Hawk, to this outcast of the Band of the Hawk, to then the Black Swordsman you saw at the beginning of Berserk, to this drained guardian, to a girl who was visibly terrified of him, to the point where who always worked alone, actually agreed to have people tag along with him.
Do you think? Because I think I heard this. You can correct me wrong, but like before you got up to Golden Age Guts, because I think there's in the manga it's the Dark Swordsman arc, which is quite it looks quite surface level.
Yeah.
But like, do you think the writer at the time knew how deep?
No, I think.
But or did he ask himself why? Because from what I heard, it was
he had some idea. Because I think I know from like the Eye Patch Wolf video, he had ideas to work on, but he wasn't sure. He was actually approached by the writer of Fist of the North Star to be the artist for like going on. And he actually turned that down because he saw potential in what he was writing and the ideas he had. And that would then lead to him doing the Golden Age arc, which was the origins of the sort of about 2 volume long arc.
It's actually, I think it's more than that. It's actually 4 volumes. Yeah, like you said, it's 4 volumes.
Yeah, 4 volumes.
Maybe even 5. I know that the Eclipse was volume 13 actually, or was it volume 7? I can't. It's been a while since I read.
But yeah, I think I was saying before. I think it's interesting just the use of like there's a character. I think the character's in front and center of Guts, but then it's just that using because it's a longer form storytelling, but it has short stories inside it, and it's just that change that transition.
Yeah, and it's also like strength of the writing. It goes back to like something we were saying. What really carries these sort of long stories is characters. Because if it was just like Guts and Griffith, I think like we'd all be pretty bored of be bored of Berserk.
But like if it was a story like we were saying, but with Golden Age, if that just happened and ended, it works just fine. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it would have worked just fine.
Yeah. So
honestly, I can't really speak to whether or not Miura really had everything figured out in relation to the Golden Arc at the time, as we can't really claim to know what his ambitions were at the time. What is interesting, though, is how he managed to tie everything together and just make everything just feel so painfully natural. Like, there's a reason why there's so many discussions every single day about Griffith did nothing wrong, Griffith did nothing wrong, the Band of the Hawk knew what they were getting themselves into. And regardless of how you may feel about that opinion, the fact that we can even have a discussion like that in the first place is a testament to just how, dare I say, layered this conversation is. If you ask me, just from my personal experience, I don't think any writer has everything in mind of what they want to do in the beginning.
Oh yeah, no, true.
I don't think that's possible personally. Like, I mean, it may be possible for some more than others depending on what they're working on. Me personally, I know for darn sure that I don't possibly think of everything. Like, you can think of a clear, defined beginning, middle, and end, and you can think about your long-term or short-term goals towards that. But somewhere along the way, your plans are going to change. Like, your long-term plans may stay the same, but what happens in the short term is what really defines how you get to the end.
Yeah, and actually, good example of that. I cannot say for certain because I have not watched any interviews of her and I refuse to, is Harry Potter. If you've read the first book, The Philosopher's Stone, and it is Philosopher's Stone, if you say it is Sorcerer's Stone, I will kick you. I am British, goddammit.
As a British, I have to back this claim. Yeah.
Yeah, but that, if you've read that book, it is a children's book. Like, like it is a book that my and even my mother did read to my brother when we were growing up. I think I mentioned this. Like I did not. It wasn't that book she read to me. It was a more creepy one for some reason. It was a book called Gruesome Grange by Anthony Horowitz. I can't pronounce his name.
Yeah.
The writer of the Alex Rider books.
Ah, interesting.
Which is I'd say it's Hogwarts if it was written by a horror author, where it's much more creepy. But both those books are sort of, they have like the, because I'm actually because I have to really like explain how like children's books relating to stories work, because relating to schools work, sort of like from when I was a kid, it's generally, you do not like going to school, and a lot of these books generally like had like especially my favorite book series that I read and like actually did read and laughed at was Horrid Henry. But one like common denotion in that is you hate school. That's what makes particularly Harry Potter the sort of deliberately makes it unusual in that Harry likes school because it's a different school. It is the school you actually want to go to. Imagine that, and just imagine that, a school you actually want to go to. Might sound weird now, like if you know like Harry Potter now, but I generally, after actually reading Harry Potter, it feels like one of those books that were written, it's for children. And it has that sort of that dark element. And I generally like going through like what happened after that. I generally think what Rowling wrote in the first book, I do not care what she says. This is my opinion. That was just written sort of as like a children's book. And that was to be its one and done thing. And then sort of probably the idea was to just go on like then do the next term and do something similar. It was from, I feel like the actual storytelling would begin in the third book, where more grounded elements. Like second book did have like the whole notion of like blood introduced, but that wasn't really like anything concrete. It was still, it still had the the typical assholes who are the asshole bullies, the horrid parents. Well, in this case, step parents. And then sort of the mystical world and friends and house points, very British house points. God, I hate those. And I feel like it was only in the third book where that actual plotting out sort of began to actually form. So again, like all I'm saying is just like as an observation. And as you can tell, I generally do not like Rowling. So that I think, like, because like I think going back to so obviously this whole rant is going back to the point of does like a writer have everything figured out beforehand? Most cases is no.
Yeah.
Like I, for instance, have sort of my general stories have chopped and changed so many times. It's only now sort of cemented a version. That's through like a lot of trial and error. But yeah, I do feel like, particularly if you're just writing just one book and then you decide to write another one. Generally, like, I think the challenge if you do that is to just find a way to sort of make it as though you've always had this plan all along. This is where this is the phrase retroactive rephrasing comes in, where you sort of take an old
idea and you expand on it.
And then you expand on it and you cast a different light on that.
Yeah.
I think one good example, another good example outside of Harry Potter is Cobra Kai. Like, because let's be honest.
Oh yeah, that's pretty much that's
the
a lot
Karate
of
Kid,
that happening.
like Karate Kid. Those were films from the 80s. They are not that deep. They're motivational. They're really good movies.
Yeah.
I have not watched the fourth one and generally don't want to.
Mm.
But generally, like, they are their own thing. They're not that complicated. What Cobra Kai does is recontextualize a lot of these events
Mm. Expands on them over like time.
and expands on them. Yeah.
Over time, different characters, different like different
Exactly.
situation in a way. Yeah, because they're different. They by this point, their lives is like it's different. Well, I guess it starts off with what's his name? Danny Russo.
Daniel LaRusso, yeah.
Danny Russo. Yeah, his obviously he's in the dumps because of what happened. Like he has not really gotten over that. So there is that.
Oh,
that
no.
connection in that sense.
No. That's other one, Johnny Lawrence.
Johnny Lawrence. Yeah, Johnny Lawrence. Yeah. So yeah, he hasn't gotten over like what happened. So there's that connection to what happened before, but then it's again that contextualizing into something beyond that. The stuff that happened before and kind of evolving on that. I have a question here. Because I think we all imagine done like long and short stories, and I guess you could even argue like a long story is a bunch of short stories in some ways. Anyway, so you can ask this either way. But like, what do you feel you learn from like writing? What do you think you can learn from writing a short story and long story? Like, what do you think like, the things you can grasp?
Should I go first?
I can start if you want because because again, I've always kind of thought about like a long story is basically a bunch of like short stories to a degree. So I'm always kind of aware of that, but I think especially doing these short stories, is kind of making me even more aware of like word count and being more concise with my words to tell a whole story. So I think from that, it's kind of make me pay more attention to the scene more, and then even just the amount of words I'm using. I'd be much more, a lot more concise with it, to try to use a few words to say a lot of things. And then just trying to like, I think, especially with the one I'd done is I had to try to tell like a quite a big idea story. Like the story I had in there was quite a big event, but I'm trying to keep it in like, I had to really like narrow it down to like a very set amount of characters. I had to be really selective about the characters I chose and what their purpose was. It made me much more deliberate about what I was doing, basically. More so than I was when I was writing before with like my long story, like the story I'm doing. Like I felt like I've been concise enough, but after doing a short story like that, it kind of made me be like very concise and be very like picky about what I'm doing. So do I need these two characters? No, I'll just use one of them. Combine this character to one character. Get rid of this scene, don't need this scene, although this scene would have been pretty cool.
Yeah.
Don't need to explain this, let it be probably put between the lines. The people pick up, they pick up. If they don't, that's tough. I think it's like that as well in long stories, but I think for me at least, that it made me be much more aware of that. I think that's definitely going to help me in the future. So yeah, I think that's one thing that's what I felt.
Yeah, kind of want to jump on that and sort of actually talk about like, what the like novellas and sort of that. So they sort of have like writing what, like I've only like recently started writing that, like taking part in like a thing we do on our Discord. And it definitely like, it's an interesting challenge and sort of makes me sort of think of basically telling a short story in like a short length of time. It is hard simply because you don't have that long to discuss. Like for us, we have like a word limit.
Yeah.
So it's about like condensing that and just but still hitting the points to like tell a story. Now I don't have any experience with novellas, but I do have experience of like consuming short stories, which is a series on Netflix called Love, Death and Robots. Which is a because like if we're talking about short stories, really have to talk about Love, Death and Robots, because like it's I haven't watched all of them, but each essentially what Love, Death and Robots is a short animated thing done by, actually, as I've learned, like some game devs, like people who worked on like cinematics, and it's about sort of telling this sort of literally a story from start to finish in about 20 minutes.
Mm.
And you end up with like some of the most creative and some of the most also like gut-wrenching and also in some cases terrifying in terms of like the Cthulhu one, but also like a really like emotionally resonant one. I think a favorite of mine I'm gonna bring up, and I know this is one of Kite's favorite, is Population Control.
That
Yeah,
one.
to give you like a brief summary, it's
Okay.
basically where humans are you just in sort of a lot of it in like it's sort of like a directed like a crime noir with a Dishonored aesthetic, where it's sort of where you have this sort of tired population control detective, basically where they will, as the name implies, control the population by killing children. And it's to the point where, and it's done like in a very masterful way where generally like it's to the point where you can't understand why people would have children simply because people can live forever now through treatment. And it ends in like, and you see the sort of the scars on this detective to the point where he visits a toy shop in like the rundown part of the old city, where he then finds a woman who actually had a child, and rather than sort of carrying out his duties and killing the kid, he actually just asked her, "Why do you do it?" And simply said, "Because because it's what I want, because I will do anything to protect him." And it ends in a really beautiful way with him sort of just walking out, not harming her or the child, even though she did try to kill him.
Mm.
And then encounters one of his colleagues, and without any word, he immediately shoots her and gets shot in the process.
Mm.
And it ends with just him looking up at the sky, and then for the first time in the entirety of the entire 20 minutes, you just see a light. His eyes just light up as though he's finally alive again.
Finally alive in his last moments.
Yeah. So there's like really, I think that's one that there's like a lot of really good examples in Love, Death, and Robots. Like I said, the Cthulhu one is like a really good in the second season is a really good example of cosmic horror. As is one called The Swarm. But I'd say Pop Control definitely shows like what doing a short story is capable of, and how just because you're in like sort of constraints means doesn't mean you can be restricted. If anything, it means you can just, because it's so short and it'll likely never happen again, you could just do whatever you want.
Yeah, it could be more creative.
Yeah, that's like my best example for like a short story.
If I could probably just add to what benefits there are to this, I'm happy that you brought up Love, Death, and Robots, mainly because Love, Death, and Robots typically goes with the 3-act structure within the sequences that it has. Due to the fact that every single episode is its own affair, this means that what you can get are far more consistent and concise results with what you're doing. Now, granted, this means that you might not get to spend as much time with the characters as you would like, but however, it's not really the length that matters in situations like this. It is the writing. It's the impact of the writing that really matters. Like, there was an episode involving a tournament kind of scenario where these people use monsters to fight, and despite the fact that the main character only has so few lines of dialogue, I remember her to this day because of how that episode ended and because of how she ultimately pulled the wool over her enemies. I remember that. So the benefit that you get from writing these is you come to realize that it's not a matter of having characters appear over and over again, and sometimes it's not a matter of staying on this one scene or one moment or just keep on peppering in these little things. No, it really is just an idea of how much can you tell within one chapter. And if you can't tell all of that within one chapter, if you're going to transition it to like long-term storytelling, guess what? You've already figured out how to continue short-term gains on long-term payoffs. That's what writing short-term stories. I mean, that's what writing short stories will do for you. And I've kind of come to realize, just for the viewers out there, we do have a little thing on our server where we all write short stories monthly. The word limit is about 5,000, and of course, the theming is centered around specific terms that the challenge organizer gives out to us. So what we do is we will form stories around 3 terms in specific, and the terms have to appear somewhere within the short story, or they can at least be thematically related to them. Now that I've given off the example, I can now basically mention what you can get from this, or at least how it's helped. I've been writing long-term stories for the past 10 years now. Like, my project has been finished for a long time. I'm just working on the sequels now. But writing short stories has kind of woke me up to some really interesting notions when it comes to writing techniques. Because here's the thing. Like Nate mentioned earlier, long-term storytelling, or long stories in general, are technically speaking a series of short stories piled up into one. And that's not entirely inaccurate. This is a lot more true than you realize. And the thing is, if you condition yourself to writing short stories, I guarantee you that when you want to do like a long-term project, threading everything together so that they constantly relate to one another is going to be 10 times more satisfying to you, because you know how to do short-term setups and long-term payoffs so much better. Because the thing is, if you are working within a short story over 5,000 words, you need that payoff at the end. It's just a matter of you figuring out where to put it and where to place it and how to build to it. So in that case, I would argue this is kind of why people always tell you to write short stories, not just for your portfolio, but for yourself. Because trust me, my story has well over 60 chapters. I know that for sure. Well over 60. And if I had learned what I had learned from writing short stories so long ago, I imagine that count would have been cut down, but not significantly. Because it's not a matter of putting a hard limit on yourself. Instead, it is learning how much you need, how much time you need to spend on one specific character or theme, and then how do you pay that all off. And this isn't a matter of imposing a harsh limit or a harsh restriction on yourself. You don't need to do that. In fact, this is a lot more freeing than people realize. It's just a matter of you knowing not necessarily just how to be concise, but knowing how to have confidence in how much you're doing at a time. You don't need to do a ridiculous amount, is what I'm getting at.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because I think sometimes some people think, writing the freedom, I need the choice, I need the option, I need the freedom. And yeah, okay, to a degree, that's true. And maybe some people more so than others, I can see that. But I think sometimes what is the most daunting thing about writing a story is the blank page and having no real rails to go on, and sometimes having all that freedom is your greatest prison. So then when you have something that's a bit more, you're kind of forced to be a bit more concise, or you have a few things you have to focus on. It actually helps. It can actually help you in a lot of ways. Obviously I think everyone's writing journey is different, and where they are is different. It's going to be different, and what's going to work for them is going to be different. But I'll definitely implore anyone to if you haven't tried, just try and do short stories, or even if you haven't tried doing long stories, give it. I think maybe you need to plan one. Maybe if long story is not your thing, maybe plan one, just so you have an idea of it. I think it's good to have at least have that sort of, at least the confidence or understanding of, okay, I understand how this works. I understand thinking about how this I think I understand how it works, and I can see how I can make it work for myself. So at least you have that that in your back pocket, and you can look at the story with those things in mind, and it probably helps you be more find more ways you can tell your story in more concise ways, or more broad and interesting ways. So I definitely implore dabbling in short stories, or you can think about outlining a long story. Yeah, definitely. I think there was something else I was gonna say, but beyond that, I think that's the most part. Have you guys got any closing thoughts? Or?
Well, I don't know.
Probably so in terms of to try to summarize try to like summarize everything. So yeah, so I think like one other thing we've sort of tried to say is like the pros and cons of like short term and long term storytelling. So short term, definitely con is short is the length. It's a very short amount of time. It's a short amount of time to tell like a story. The pro is that sort of despite that sort of limit, you can actually be more freer. You can try. Like for me, I'm sort of now that I've started doing them, I'm going to try like different things that aren't related to my main project, and just like experiment with ideas. And like I said, I think as Kite said, it not only can sort of improve your portfolio, but it can sort of help you sort of in your general writing, to sort of make threads and connections. And then with like long-term storytelling, there is like personally, as much as it is a headache to do, I do have a lot of satisfaction in making my own sort of long-term story. The con one is that it is very hard to do. Like
Commitment, basically.
Yeah, it is a commitment to do.
Yeah.
It was not something you could write in about a week. It will take years.
Yeah.
Sometimes to write.
Yeah, and I guess with regards to that, I think maybe some things to help in if you're going to like write a long story is, again, when I say that a long story is a bunch of short stories, I think you should take that to especially when you're writing it, to keep that in mind, because then at least that way you're not looking at, obviously it's good you have your goal, your end goal, whatever books, whatever it is, how far the line, that's good, but then right now you got to focus on this chapter, you got to focus on the scene, you got to focus on this arc. So I think the best thing to help me write it is, obviously I have my goal in the end, but I am so focused on the next step, the next scene, the next chapter, the next piece of dialogue. So I'm just chopping away at this tree. I'm not looking at the whole forest. I'm just focusing on this tree, and I'm just gonna keep going at it consistently. And eventually, if you're consistent with that, and you stick to it, you're consistent with it, and you find also, I think like we're saying with short stories, if you have I think one thing we probably didn't mention, like the satisfaction of like when you write something, you feel, oh, okay, that's complete. It's satisfying. So I think if you're writing and you're focusing on just the smaller parts of the whole story, like the scenes and the chapters, and you write that chapter and you think, okay, that's my goal, I've done that, you get a satisfaction there, and that helps. I think that will help keep building momentum to keep going, because instead of just looking at, oh, I haven't completed this whole book, oh, this is so difficult, you need to be like, okay, I've done chapter 1, awesome, I've done chapter 2, or heck, hey, I write 500 words today, I write 200 words today, I wrote 100 words today. Like, finding ways to break that goal down and giving yourself a focus on, okay, if I do this, that's rewarding. I think that's really important when you're writing a long story, because otherwise, yeah, you're just blowing stuff up. You're just looking at the I haven't reached the end of this epic battle of a 15-book story. Yeah, I could never do that. Like I sometimes, once I forget, but like I'm just so focused on the current arc or current chapter that stuff kind of, it's just there, because the goal's already set. So I think setting your goals to help build, like, you feel you're getting something out of it. It's not just this book means nothing until I complete it. It's like, oh, I've got a bunch of chapters here. So I think that's the important thing to probably help you alleviate the burden of writing a long story. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, is there any no other closing thoughts?
Most I can say is, if you're very much into writing, finding the distinction between short term and long term may feel a little bit cumbersome. The best thing that you really ought to do for yourself is determine what your goals are long term, and just find a lot of short term solutions for them. Because you need to be able to bring yourself towards the end and ensure that the audience still has something to go on, hold on to. Because a lot of this really just comes down to pacing at the end of the day.
Mm.
And this is why I mentioned that this stuff is a lot more hand in hand than people realize. I don't really think it's wise to completely separate them, despite the distinctions I have been giving. I'm trying to mention that what you really ought to do at the end of the day, find your pace, determine how much you want to give out at one moment and how much you want to give out on the next. Because I don't really think there is really a foolproof way on determining the quality writing of a short-term and long-term project. I don't really think that's the wisest way of looking at it.
Yeah.
Because we've already established that for all the different examples we have, there are the best of writers know how to mesh them together. And if anything, that is honestly the best way to do it. Because eventually, there's going to come a time where you are probably going to feel like that even you yourself are stringing yourself along, and you don't want to do that. There was an example that I wanted to bring up earlier. This mostly just applies to a lot of Netflix series in general. The problem with the Netflix model of storytelling is that it really demands a lot out of you. It tries to do a lot of long-term stuff, but a lot of the short-term stimuli just does not hit you nearly as well, because it is clear that they're trying to save everything for the last moment of the episode. This is why a lot of people can sometimes feel as though they're being strung along for something. I'm not telling you that you have to make things blow up every 5 seconds. No, you don't have to do that, but you have to make the pursuit of the ultimate answer at the end of every episode worth the push. Because a lot of this comes down to someone's time, and the worst thing you can do to someone is waste their time. So make the journey towards it feel rewarding, basically.
It's actually true. I think I kind of touched upon it a little bit, but I didn't say it directly. Where I think with some of the, and I was thinking about Netflix shows because they do quite a lot, where they notice how the cliffhangers are in a way put in a way where it's like, I have to watch the next episode. What's going on? I have to watch the next episode, and I get it, and it works. It works with a good degree, but I think if you are exposed to that a lot, I can see where you can be a bit tired of like, I'm so fed up of having to watch all these episodes just to get myself satisfied. But I guess it's like one of the things. But
my final statement is that if you're a writer, join Nate's server and join our short story contest and like and subscribe. And
that's it. Do it.
That's your goddamn shill. What is wrong with you? Oh my god!
Nothing wrong with a bit of shameless.
Oh my god, that plug! Oh, that plug! Oh no!
I'm gonna cry and play the end of every video. No,
get yourself on Tekken right now. I'm gonna kick your ass.
Fight me, bro. Alright guys, this has been another episode of the Lounge Podcast. Thank you for joining us. And it's been honestly a really good topic. I've been thinking about it for a bit, because especially since doing the short stories, because I never really got around to doing too much short stories before. So really cool to talk about. This is Lounge Podcast, and see you guys next time. Take care. Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.